Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. It's been a minute. I'm recording this from Tacoma, Washington. So I am back in the United States. We actually made some pour over coffee. I bought some in Japan. I had this all the time in Japan. Believe it or not, we didn't really go to cafes as much because we were trying to save money. But this here is one of my favorite, and that's what I made today. So I wanted to just give you guys a good old sippity sip before we begin. Mm-hmm. Mm-mm-mm. Okay. Hello. Hi, everyone. This is crazy. It's crazy that we're back in the US. If you see me looking down, it's because I've got my laptop in front of me and I've taken a lot of notes for today's video. First of all, hi and welcome to all of my new subscribers. I gained like 20 subscribers over the past 2 weeks, which I know to big YouTubers, it's not a big deal. But for me, someone who's starting their channel back up, I feel really grateful that people have chosen to subscribe to my channel. And so thank you for being here and for engaging with my content. That's one thing that as I come back to YouTube is like what's really important to me is to be able to engage with people, to be able to talk. That's the whole point of me doing this, right? I enjoy the engagement. I mean, not always. Some of the engagement is inappropriate or just fucking rude, but it's fine. Yeah, so just want to start there and say thank you for any of my new viewers who just joined my channel. Quick little update. I am back in the United States. I am currently in Tacoma at my partner's house. He lives in Tacoma. I'm living back at my parents' house about an hour away from here, up north. Bitch. No, I'm just kidding. So I have been living back at home with my parents. My boyfriend and I decided that this was best as he currently has his dad living in one room and a roommate living in another room of his two-bedroom home. We decided it would be best if I just stayed at my parents where I feel more comfortable until we can free up the house. And so coming next month in June, I will be moving into this house and I'm so excited. Look at this yard. Like I've been thinking about all the YouTube videos we can make out here. It's also just such a beautiful day in Washington today. I'm so grateful for the sun coming out to play. Let's take a sip of coffee here. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about how I managed to quit my job and travel for 5 months. And I've been reflecting a lot on what kinds of things I would have done differently, how I prepared for this. I didn't really give my partner enough time for him to formulate his own thoughts around this. And so I'm making this video solo. But if you guys really like this content and you want to hear his perspective, let me know in the comments below and I'll see if I can convince him to come on for another video with me where we can talk about this more extensively. I also am going to talk about the financial aspect of this trip. None of this would be possible if it wasn't for my savings account and the support of my family. This would not have been possible without the support of my family. So, at the core, at the base of this trip, I just want to call out my privilege of being able, like, it goes back to like my privilege of being able to go to college and pursue a career that could give me a good paying job that could allow me to be able to save money at the base, right? Something else I want to call out is that I am very privileged to have a mother and a father who are very supportive of me, who love me very much, and who helped me take care of my cats while I was away, allowed me to keep some of my belongings in their home, and allowed me to park my car, my Forerunner, not a small car, in their parking lot so that I could do this trip. So these are the things that I have as privilege that allowed me to do this. I also want to call out that yes, I really focused on saving money for this trip about a year before I started the journey, but I also had a solid amount of money in my savings account. I had a couple car accidents a few years back, and I put all of my settlement money in my savings account. I also lived at my parents' when I was going to college. I went to college later in life, as you guys may have seen in other videos. I went to college in my late 20s after my divorce. And so I moved back in with my parents and I was able to save a good amount of money because I was working full time. And so I had money in my savings account. Now, that's not to say that you can't do this without these things. I just want to call out that these were the things that I had in my favor. My partner did not have a solid savings account before starting to save last year because he had already done this trip when I met him 2 years ago, or yeah, I guess 2 years ago now. He's done this 2 years in a row now. The first time he did it for just a couple months, and this time he did it for 5 months. He's an example of having done this without having a good amount of money in your savings account. Okay, I want to call that out. And I know that this is the long intro, but I think it's important. Feel free to skip ahead to the things that matter most to you, but I am going to go into the things that were important to think about, prepare for, do prior to this trip. I think another big piece to being able to do this trip was making peace with a lot of things surrounding this trip. And what I mean by that is that you have to go into this mentality of being able to quit your job, which is hard and brave. And for me, I was very anxious about that. I was very anxious because I've been a working girl since I was 16 years old and I have not worked. I've always worked. I've always had a job. So it took a lot of internal work to work through this idea that I wasn't going to have a job for however long I was going to be traveling for, and that I wasn't going to have income, that I wasn't going to be a member of the working class, that I was going to have to come back and find a new job, potentially a new career entirely. Having to face that and get into that mentality, being able to let go of the current place that you're in is crucial to being able to do this successfully. And I'm not going to say that it wasn't hard for me throughout the trips. I want to say in Ciudad de Mexico, and a little bit in Yucatan, I really struggled to not have a job, to not have income, to be in the present moment and not think so much about like what's going to happen when I get back and what if I can't find a job, and this whole scarcity mindset that we get ourselves into, I think was really hard for me in Ciudad de Mexico and Yucatan, which was January, February, so about a month into my trip. Another thing I really faced was just my financial anxiety. I didn't realize how anxious I was about money and how I was just like a little rabbit, just like hoarding all of my goods, hoarding all of the money that I could into my savings account. I didn't really have a reason why. I never really thought about what I would use the money for. I just wanted to keep saving, saving, saving. And I thought a lot about where that came from, right? What messaging I received as a young girl around money and as an adult around money. Like money has always been associated with anxiety for me. And so to really think about the fact that I wasn't going to be working, there wasn't going to be money coming in, and I was just going to be using up my savings was really hard for me. Thankfully, I really want to give a shout out to my boyfriend. He is a king. He's the MVP. Like he really helped me work through those feelings. I also want to give a shout out to a podcast that I listened to. Drop the name on the screen. Or listening to some of her podcasts really helped me work through this financial anxiety that I had. And she was able to even so much as name it, because I think part of it is that we don't even realize that we have that we have all this messaging around money. And so just listening to her podcast as I was making this decision to leave was crucial for me to being able to make this choice of leaving, and how important it was for me to get into that mentality, to shift my mindset completely around money, around my career, finding out who I am beyond my career, this whole scarcity mindset, and what I was going to do when I got back, and if I was going to find a job. The reality is there are jobs out there. Maybe not the perfect job, maybe not the remote job that you want, maybe not the high paying, full benefits job, but there really are jobs out there. And I am so lucky that I have the support of my family and my partner, and I am able to, I don't have a job yet. I've been back for 2 to 3 weeks and I don't have a job yet. And I'm not super anxious about it because one, I have money in my savings. Two, I have the support of my partner. And three, I have the support of my family. And they've all allowed me to take my time as I find a job. So I've definitely been applying. I've definitely been working on that, but it isn't something that I really need to do right away. And if you don't have the support of a family member or a partner, then how can you set yourself up to be able to have some cushion when you are coming back? Because that is something that was also super important, and I'm going to talk about a little bit more about the coming back and what that's been like. Hold, please. So good. So once I got to thinking about the things that I really was going to have to work through prior to this trip, I, with the direction of my partner, sat down and did a budget. I really just opened up Google Sheets and just started writing down what money is going out of my bank account every month, what money is coming in every month, and what money would need to come out every month if I decide to quit my job and travel abroad. I also had to have a rough idea of what places I was going to go and around how much money I was going to be spending at each place. I also had to think about lodging. A big plus for me was traveling with my boyfriend because every place that we went to, we would split the cost of lodging. And so that was really helpful, right? Because if you're going to, say, Ciudad de Mexico and you're going to spend, let me give you an actual number. We spent $1,400 for 1 month at the Airbnb that we stayed in Ciudad de Mexico in Chinatown, and we split that cost in half. So we were each paying $771 for that month, which was less than I was paying for rent in my apartment in Seattle, right? So it made sense. It was something I could afford. And it made sense in my head. Like, if I'm spending that much money living in Seattle, I can spend that much money in Mexico for a month. Just coming up with a budget around like how much money you're going to spend in lodging, how much money you want to spend. It goes down to, are you the kind of traveler that wants to do touristy things, or are you the kind of traveler that wants to do day-to-day mundane things like just go to a park and walk around or go to a coffee shop once a week instead of every single day? You have to really think about what kind of life you want to be living while you're abroad, and then that gives you a better idea of how much money you should be spending. Like, you can go as far as going on Google, looking at some of the restaurants in the area that you're going to be staying at, looking at their menu, looking to see how much things cost, thinking about, do they have a big street food scene? Because street food is like typically half the cost of going out to a restaurant, going out to coffee shops. And so looking at those numbers gives you a good idea of how much money you're going to be spending. For Mexico, for us, because we've been to Mexico so many times, we did have a foundation, but I do want to say that some of the places that we hadn't been to, like Yucatan, for example, where you've got Holbox, Tulum, Cancun, all these touristy areas are going to be expensive unless you are out of the hub of zona hotelera, the hotel zone. So you got to think about a lot of things, right? The places that you're going to. That's something that I feel like we didn't really do when we wanted to go to Yucatan, because we had wanted some beach time. I did think about the tourism that was going to lie ahead, but I didn't think about how much more expensive. Actually, I did think about that, but I didn't think about how much more expensive it was going to be even to just go to the market and get some groceries for the week. For me, I really had to think about how much money I was going to be spending at the places that I was going to be going to, and then just writing that down into my Google sheet of finances. In terms of lodging, my partner and I sat down and talked about what was important to us in terms of lodging. Did we want to do the cheapest route possible and stay at hostels along the way where we potentially would not be sleeping together, potentially would have to share bathrooms with others? We looked at the pros and cons of that, and we decided that for what we wanted to experience, it made more sense to just get rooms or homes that we could share together and be together. You can really go the cheapest route. I don't think we went the cheapest route by any means. It made sense to us. If we could have done one thing differently, well, there's so many things we could have done differently, but one was purchasing our lodging ahead of time. Things change. I mean, we didn't really know what our itinerary was going to be throughout the entire trip, so it was kind of hard to purchase lodging when we didn't even know what city we were going to go to next. The way we did it made sense for what we were doing and how we were feeling in the moment, but if I could give advice to a friend, if a friend was doing this, I would definitely suggest that they plan this out a little bit better and really take their time to purchase their lodging ahead of time. So that money is all out of your account and you can really look at what's left over and think about how you want to spend the rest of the money that you have. Because lodging was a big chunk of our expenses. For me, it was one third of my expenses for the total amount that I spent since I started traveling in December. So back in the beginning of the year, I had gotten a job at a research institute and I was pretty miserable. I was very depressed and I really didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I felt really lost. I felt really stuck. I felt really sad. And I was pretty desperate to find relief. And I talked things through with different people and I made the decision that I was going to be traveling. With that decision, I want to say in March, April, I got a second job at a Mexican restaurant in downtown Seattle as a host slash server, just so I could save as much money as possible. The biggest thing because of my financial anxiety was to work on my expenses because I feel like I really was spending a lot of money going out, hanging out with friends, buying all kinds of stupid shit that I didn't need to buy. One of the first things I did was give up my one bedroom apartment in Seattle and I moved in with a friend. And that really helped me cut my expenses in half in terms of rent, right? And I just made the conscious decision to stop eating out. I was drinking coffee a lot at different cafes. I was just trying coffee everywhere. And so I cut down on that. I cut down on drinking out. I started shopping secondhand. And honestly, I've always been like a Goodwill Valley Village girly, but like I made it strictly a thing. I started taking public transport every chance I could just to save on gas because bitch, gas was expensive last year. I started exercising outside instead of joining a gym because I mean, when you really think about how much money you spend on things, when you really start to write things down, you realize how much money you're spending on Uber Eats, on Uber, on the gym, on all of these things that you could do without. There were ways for me to save money and also be able to live the life that I was living. I was still able to buy new outfits. They just happened to be secondhand, or I could still go downtown and hang out with friends. I would just have to take public transportation. Like, it's fine. I started cutting my own hair. I actually cut my own hair a couple weeks ago. Started doing my own eyebrows, started doing my own nails. I mean, I really implemented a minimalist spending, minimalist purchasing. Like I was not buying anything. At one point, I even told my roommate because she'd bought some furniture for the apartment, and I was like, "Girl, like I'm not trying to buy anything. I'm just like trying to save every penny I can." I would tell my friends if they would invite me out, like I'm not trying to go out right now. Like not to say that I didn't go out last year because I did. Not to say I didn't go out to concerts because I did. I was just really selective about where my money was going, and making sure that I was putting as much money as possible into my savings account and just communicating to your friends like I really want to go to your third, fourth, fifth party this month, but I can't. I can only choose one because I'm saving money. And they all understood. And if they don't understand, fuck them. Back to that Excel spreadsheet, I really also had to think about what expenses were going to continue while I was abroad. And so I looked at my car payment, car insurance, cell phone bill, cat expenses, and lodging because we hadn't bought all of our lodging by the time that we had left. So, really thinking about how much money you're going to be spending monthly. And so, once I decided that I was going to do this trip, I had to really set myself up for success. I had to figure out how I was going to exit the room. I told my roommate as soon as I knew that was the decision I was making, I told her I'm not going to re-sign a lease at the end of the year. Really communicating with her about that helped me. That was one way to set myself up for success. Another way was with figuring out my car situation. Do I want to sell my Forerunner or do I want to keep it? But if I keep it, I have to pay for it and I have to pay for car insurance and I have to find a good place for it and I have to find people that I can trust to move it and or drive it. So figuring that out, figuring out if I had enough money for that, figuring out your car insurance stuff. For me, I ended up calling my car insurance and I told them about my situation and they were able to cut down my insurance. Want to say 30 to 40 bucks, which, in the long run was helpful. But I know that there's also subleasing platforms. So that's something you can think about if you have a car and you don't want to sell it. Figuring out my employment situation was huge. I really had to think about strategically when is a good time to tell my employer that I don't want to work here anymore. As I mentioned, I started the job with them at the beginning of the year, and I want to say around the summertime, they were asking me to take lead on one of the research studies that was going to launch in January of 2024. And in my head, I'm like, bitch, I am hoping to be on a beach in January 2024 outside of this country. So I had to really think about when do I tell my employer? And I think I can't speak for anybody other than for myself. I was working with a really great team, and I really felt like it wouldn't have been fair for me to have waited until December to tell them, oh, by the way, I know you trained me. I know I took lead. I know you're expecting me to launch this study in January, but I'm leaving. It just didn't feel right for me. And on the other side of the token, I also thought, if I tell them about this, I could potentially lose my job in the summer. And I could potentially lose my job as soon as they hire somebody else to replace me. And so it was really hard for me to think about when to tell someone I'm going to be leaving here at the end of the year and I still need to be employed and I still need health insurance. So, how can we make this work? When I look back, I actually think that they really appreciated my transparency around this because they were able to figure out who else was going to take lead on the study, think about hiring, think about the team itself and how I could still be a part of the team in a way that made sense for them and for me, and we were able to come up with something, and it was great. I mean, I gave it my all until the very last day. I was working on stuff and I really appreciate the support. I appreciate that I had a job until the end. I brought a lot to the table too with my experience. So for me, it made sense to tell them early on. I don't know what kind of job you have or others have and if it makes sense for them, but just weigh out your options and weigh out what makes sense for you and what makes sense for the team that you work for. And I'm sure you can come up with a solution that works for everybody. Also, with my employer, there were options for working remotely. Just think about like, if you can't totally quit your job, could you work remotely for a few months? That's an option that you can explore as well. For me, it was really important to be able to leave in good standing because coming back, I feel like if I really needed a job right now, I could reach out to them. And if they needed an employer, they would definitely hire me back. Like I am very confident about that. So these are things that are important to consider. And if not, like at the end of the day, you really are just an employer and you will be replaced. Everybody is replaceable, and there are jobs out there. There really are jobs out there that are looking for temporary workers. So, just something to think about. I'm grateful that they kept me on because I was able to utilize my health insurance, which also, side note, just super important if you have health insurance through your employer, because that's what it be like in the United States. Utilize your insurance before it's going to run out. I definitely did. I went to a gastro doctor that I was putting off for a while. I got diagnosed with irritable bowel syndrome. I did all kinds of testing and things before I lost my insurance because of leaving the job. And so think about how you can set yourself up for success and how you can really leverage off of all of the benefits that you have. Oh, yeah. Another thing that I did, I traveled very little in 2023. Where I was working, how do I explain this? Because the way the US manages PTO, vacation time, is so fucked, I think, now that I've talked to other people abroad. But the way that we do it in the US, or the way that they do it through my employer, is I would get vacation and sick time, personal time off hours through my employer, depending on how many hours I was working. And so a decision that I made was to really not utilize any of my vacation so that I could cash it out at the end of my time working at that company. You really have to look at where your hours are going and what you can cash out at the end of the year. So for me, I found out that I could cash out my vacation, but I couldn't cash out my personal time hours or some bullshit like that. And so those are the ones that I would utilize throughout the year. Or sick time you can't cash out. So if I was feeling sick, bitch, I was calling in sick. Like, gone are the days where I was trying to work through a fucking cold. Like, nah, 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 nah. Not if I have hours, and not if I'm gonna lose the hours at the end of the year. So really think about, that's just one little side note. If you have these hours, and if they are in different banks, what can you cash out at the end of the year? What can you not? Another thing that I really had to think about was my student loans, right? College. So, because I was not employed, I was able to tell them that, and I was able to freeze my accounts because Biden did something with student loans where you could freeze your accounts if you don't have income coming in and your interest would not go up. And so for me, it just made sense to do that while I was unemployed. So I paused my student loans, and my credit is not getting fucked. My interest isn't going up. And I was able to take that off of my bills to pay while I was going to be traveling. Figuring out who's going to take care of your pets. I think for us, it was really important not to separate. So I have a cat and my boyfriend has a cat. And when I was living in the apartment, they were both living with me because my partner was spending a lot of nights over. And so it was really important for us to not separate them. It also, I mean, my cat is my queen, and I needed to find someone that I could trust with her, someone that could love her and give her what she needs. And so finding the right person to take care of your pets and giving them instruction, easing them into the process, right? I moved into my parents' place in the beginning of December so that I could get the girls comfortable living in a new space and show my parents how they needed to be taken care of was helpful. And then figuring out what I was going to do with my things was also really important. So I downsized. I sold a lot of things on OfferUp, things that I wasn't using, like my bike or like my roller skates or random furniture that I wasn't really in love with. I sold as much as I could so that one, I could get more cash into my savings account, and just so that I could have less things to hold in storage was really helpful. I left some boxes at my parents' house, and then I also left some boxes here at my boyfriend's house. And then lastly, one other thing that I did before leaving was looking at my cell phone plan, and I actually got a new phone before I left so that I wouldn't have to deal with a iPhone 10 that I was having issues with and have to buy a new phone while I was abroad. I also was able to call them up and set up an international plan when I started doing my Asia leg of my travels. But preparing yourself for changing up your phone plan, or thinking about getting an eSIM, or thinking about getting a phone abroad, things to think about. If I could go back in time, the last thing that I would do to set myself up for success, purchase travel insurance. And I've talked about this in other videos, but with the injury that happened in India, I just feel like it would have been so much better had I had insurance. I have worked in healthcare for over 10 years, and I just have always had insurance. I'm just really fucking privileged and lucky in that way that I've always had health insurance. I know that's not the case for a lot of people living in the United States. So, someone who's always had insurance, I really, really should have invested in a good travel insurance before leaving, just because there were many times where I think I could have utilized the insurance because of my accident and infection and all of the things that went down. I did look at my costs for healthcare, and it's not too bad just because it wasn't the US. But yeah, I guess I don't even know how much travel insurance costs. Let's look. Backpacker insurance, okay. Because I guess it's saying here most travel policies set a limit on the length of any one trip, usually around 30 days. If 90 days still isn't enough, there's also long stay travel insurance, backpackers insurance. Okay, hold on. Okay, so I'm looking at average plan cost 251. So I could have saved myself like around $100, I want to say, if I would have gotten travel insurance. So that's one thing that I wish I would have done differently, just getting health insurance for my trip. So, how we spent our money. I think now is a good time to just look at my expenses and tell you guys how much money I've spent. Let's look at numbers. The range that I used for this was December 2023 when I stopped working. So around the 12th of December, I looked at my balance. I then looked at my balance upon returning from my trip. So this is all trip expenses. I spent a total of $10,924.52. I divided the money in different buckets. One of the buckets was lodging. I spent a total of $3,238. I looked at my healthcare costs. I ended up spending $313. So health insurance would have been nice, but I'm glad it wasn't terrible. 313 is not too bad. I'm grateful. I also have a bucket of expenses that I was paying back home. So bills, cats, random fees like Spotify and Apple and my cell phone and my car, whatever. $3,070. Another bucket was transportation from city to city, and this includes when we had to take buses or when we had to take ferries. It excludes public transportation around each of the cities. It was just from, let's say, Seattle to Michoacan or from Michoacan to Ciudad de Mexico. I ended up spending $3,054. That leaves the remaining amount of $1,248.52 for food. And this includes going out, street food when we'd go to the mercados, whatever, public transportation, activities, gifts for myself, for others, any other miscellaneous expenses that we were making while we were abroad. So again, my total was $10,924 that was spent since December through April 20th or 24th when I got back. So it's a good chunk of money, right? I looked at that and I was like, damn. I think some math that I could do would be to look at how much money I was spending living in Seattle, right? I didn't break it down too much because I already feel like this video is so fucking long. Those were my costs. And yeah, just really think about how much money are you spending living in the city that you're living in. Honestly, having the break from work has been so great. Like I feel so rejuvenated and I'm ready to work, and I haven't felt this ready to do anything in such a long time. Okay, sorry. One little section that I wanted to talk about was just like how we spent our money. So I did talk a little bit about food and public transport and things, but I think there's a lot of different ways in which you could cut down the cost of your trip. This is just what we spent. There were ways in which we navigated how much money we were going to spend. For example, like when we were with family, we were very transparent about our funds and that we were not looking to go to all the touristy spots. We were looking to be with family and to do free shit mostly. We had to make choices around food a lot. You know, do we want to eat out? How often do we want to eat out versus cooking at home? Occasionally getting street food if we really don't want to cook because we're tired, but our budget doesn't allow for a fancy restaurant. Again, you have to get into this mentality of like, how much money can I save, right? Like, I was carrying around my water bottle everywhere. We were always looking for the closest mercado so that we could get our weekly groceries and get local fruits and vegetables. We also sought out free experiences, right? Like we went to the park a lot. We would look for free museum days. We'd also strategize around like, if we're going to go to this museum, can we eat breakfast at home so that we only have to eat out once? Public transportation versus Uber, right? Uber is an option in Mexico, and there are different Uber like services in Asia, and we really had to make the choice of when we were going to utilize these services versus when we were going to use public transportation. When was it safe? et cetera, et cetera. Just not buying stuff, not buying 100 souvenirs for friends that are just going to toss them in or not even care about. When we started traveling through Asia, we started purchasing like a bag of candy that by the end of our Asia leg, we had a bunch of candy from different places. And then we just made little goodie bags. Yeah, just not buying shit for others or for yourself. Like I think the only place I really went hard was in Japan where I got like secondhand things, but outside of that, I wasn't about to purchase stuff. Just really getting into that mindset of like living comfortably and enjoying the place that you're in and being in the moment and also being a little frugal with your money, not spending just to spend. That's how we spent our money. G and I had different budgets because, again, he didn't have savings like I did. And honestly, I think him having a little bit more of a tight budget helped me finance myself a little bit better. I do think I spent more money than him because I did go to India and Indonesia and I had the healthcare costs and I have a car. He sold his car. So again, there are definitely different ways to do this and whatever makes sense for you. However, this is just how I did it. One last thing I want to touch on is just what I wish I would have done differently. I would say get health insurance. I think just for peace of mind, it would have made a difference for sure. Sure, I only spent $313 on healthcare costs, but if you guys didn't see my Indonesia video, I didn't leave my homestay because of my infection. And so when I look at my Indonesia costs, right? So I spent $402 on the flight. I spent $115 on lodging. Yeah, that was crazy for a week. That's amazing. But, the 300 really should be more like 800, right? I definitely wish I would have gotten travel insurance, but it is what it is. Just really think about it. Think if you're going to be getting on motorcycles or if you're going to be doing extravagant things, even if you're not. Like sometimes just the luck of the draw. I also wish I would have been more mindful of just like my mail. I sent all of my mail to my parents' house and they were saving stuff, but they weren't opening stuff for me. And I had a couple of things come in the mail that were time sensitive. And I wish I would have been more on top of that. I think because I was thinking, I don't have a job and I don't have all these bills, like what's gonna come in the mail? Like doesn't everything comes through email? But just being on top of that. I also wasn't super on top of my car and coming back I found mold in my car because my parents ended up not moving my car at all. They would turn it on from time to time, but they wouldn't move it. And I wish I would have just asked them to do that. Being more on top of that would have also been helpful. Oh, yeah. Another thing that I did more so when I was looking at Asia because I wasn't familiar with Asia than I was with Mexico, but definitely stay on top of like travel advisories and look at like visas. Right? Y'all know my fiasco with the visa in Vietnam, but visas is another thing that costs money and time and you have to file and you have to get documents and pictures and all kinds of things. So just looking into if the countries that you're going to be going into require any of those things is super important. And then lastly, I could do another video talking about what it's been like being back in the US, living back at my parents' house. I don't know if that's something you guys would be interested in watching, but I really prepared myself as much as I could for what it was going to be like to be traveling abroad. I didn't really know what I was going to need upon coming back. And I don't even know if I could have done anything differently, to be honest, because this is just how everything is unraveling. But I think it's important to think about financially what are you going to need when you come back, right? I still need to keep paying my car payment and I don't have a job. And so, how much longer can I sustain that without a job before I need to just like go work at a Trader Joe's until I figure out what my next plan is in terms of my career? Cats gonna keep pooping, gonna keep eating. So, thinking about all of your expenses beyond the time that you come back from your trip is really important. And I don't really think I thought about that as much because I had envisioned coming back and like getting straight to work, but that isn't the case. Part of why that didn't occur is because I have the support of my partner and the support of my family who, my partner has welcomed me into his home and has said like take a couple months to figure out what you're doing next. Like, you don't have to help me with bills right away. So that's super helpful. And also, my parents are like, stay here as long as you need until you get your feet back on the ground. And that's been super helpful. And so, while I appreciate that and I don't have the stress of having to like look for a job right away, because that has changed for me now that I'm not working, I'm like, oh, okay, so I don't have to work right away, but like I still have expenses. And so it's a really confusing time. I've been finding ways to make money. Like yesterday, I helped my partner's mom. She has a small business. And so I went and helped her out yesterday. So I've got some money from that. I've also been like deep cleaning my parents' home and selling stuff, and they're like, keep the money, like we just want our house clean, like whatever. And so I've been making money from that. So there are different ways to find income, of course, but just thinking about that, just thinking about coming back, I think is important. And really lucky to have the support of everybody. And I know that that's not something that everybody has. And so I think that's important to call out. Be ready for just like the mental shock of coming back to the US and how much more expensive things are and how uncomfortable it's going to be for a while. Because yeah, like it's really nice that my parents are letting me stay in their home, but I'm currently sleeping in their living room, right? Like, I don't have my own space. I'm living out of my suitcase. All of my things are in storage. I'm not really going to be home until June. And I kind of prepared myself mentally for it. But when you're in it, sometimes it can be really hard. If you're going to do this, think about what you need when you get back. Because I think I was so focused on what I needed while I was going to be traveling that I didn't even really think about what I was going to need upon returning. Do I have any regrets? No. I mean, everything happened in the way that it was supposed to. And I think one of the next videos that I'm going to be making is just talking about all of the lessons that I've learned and all of the ways in which I'm now a new person than I was before my travels. I'm just so eternally grateful for this opportunity. This is life changing, honestly. It really is. And I wish this upon every person on the planet. I wish everybody could just, in their adult life, not be employed for 3 months, just to rest, to think about what's important to you, to think about what you need in the next stage of your life, to be with family, to be with yourself, to be with nature. That's it for today's video. I am so grateful that you all came back to watch. Please let me know if there's anything else that you guys want me to talk about, or if you want my partner to join the next video so he can talk about his part of this trip as well. Yeah, maybe we should do like a little video on like what it was like to just be together for 5 months, because that is also, he's saying hi. That is also a thing. Like being with your partner for 5 months when neither one of you is working. He was working remotely, but just like contract work, and that is another whole video. I hope to see you guys in the next video.